Welcome, ladies and gents. Chris Andre here. You can find me at BetBoxing on Twitter, or of course you can subscribe to the channel. Let's talk boxing. There's loads to cover today, so let's start off talking about the retirement of a fantastic fighter in Mikey GARCIA, a four-weight world champion. You know, early in his career, he was tipped for big things. Floyd MAYWEATHER said he would be the future #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world, the guy to take over the torch after Floyd had left the sport behind, and he was indeed looking sensational early in his career. And around sort of 2013, 14, he went on a great run. He was stopping the likes of Orlando Salido, Juan Manuel Lopez, Robin Martinez. He then had the points victory over Juan Carlos Burgos, and things were looking really good for Mikey. And then he had a contract dispute with Top Rank, which kept him out of the sport for something like 2.5 years. And that layoff was obviously significant, not necessarily in stunting his development, because when he came back, he still looked brilliant. He looked better than ever, you could argue. But in terms of legacy building and the fights he could have had in that period, it certainly stunted him in that regard. And perhaps he started to chase legacy and take some big risks as a result of that. More often than not, they paid off, because when he did come back, he beat Elio Rojas. He then beat Dejan Zlatikanen by knockout. That was brutal. And Zlatikanen was considered a real pocket rocket at the time. You know, you have to place each victory into the context of the time. Far too often, boxing fans will look at a guy who was highly rated, he gets battered, he's then not the same again, and people seek to undermine him after that. Oh, he was a hype job. Well, was he a hype job, or was he just ruined? Right? Because Mikey put in a great performance. And I'm not just talking about Zlatikanen, but this is a general pattern, right? You see it with Joe Calzaghe and Jeff Lacey. Jeff Lacey was considered a hot favorite. The Americans didn't give Joe a chance, and then Joe batters him, and all of a sudden, Lacey never goes on to achieve what he was supposed to achieve, and he was branded a hype job. Was he a hype job, or did he just accrue certain damage that never enabled him to fulfill his potential? Well, Mikey also went on to completely outboxed Adrian Broner. That was a fantastic display of accuracy, particularly against a guy who likes to change the levels in Adrian Broner with that upper body movement. He then beat Sergei Lipinets. Now, Lipinets, again, putting it in the context of the time, he was 13-0. He completely dominated him. He dominated Robert Easter Jr. as well, and he was flying high. And then he decided he was going to take a massive risk and go after the undefeated Errol Spence Jr., who was a monster compared to him in terms of size. And in fairness to Mikey, against this very destructive fighter, he never once looked like he was going to get stopped. He was always plucky and trying, but he just couldn't close the gap. And it was a brilliant performance from Errol Spence, showing an ability to box off the back foot, use a brilliant, consistent jab. He didn't decide to walk Mikey down and try and knock him out. He knew the sort of punching power that Mikey carries and the accuracy, and he chose to put in a boxing performance. It was a real great boxing display from Errol. But a lot of people seem to judge Mikey because of that, and I think that's really unfair. I mean, he came back and he won a unanimous decision over Jesse Vargas, and you have to understand he's operating against guys that are much bigger than him at this stage. Most recently, he was the victim of a shock defeat against Sandor Martin. Sandor is a very good fighter in his own right, by the way. But after he lost that, he was sort of criticized by a lot of people. They felt that he should be beating guys like Sandor Martin, and as a result, basically, he seems to have lost passion for the sport, and he walks away. And I just hope that he's remembered in a manner that he deserves to be remembered, because you're talking about a terrific fighter here. So Mikey GARCIA walks away from the sport. I wish him nothing but the best. Great ambassador for boxing and a fantastic fighter. Moving on from that, as he prepares for a September showdown against Luis Ortiz, Andy Ruiz has uploaded a couple of photographs and he's looking trim. But this is not the first time we've fallen for this trick, right? So we have to be careful in the build up to the rematch against Anthony Joshua. He uploaded a photograph where he had his hands up on some sort of pull-up bar and he was looking very slim, right? He was looking like it was a new transformed Andy Ruiz. And he turns up on fight night and he looks like he'd eaten the previous Andy Ruiz. He was an absolute unit, couldn't move around the ring, got completely outboxed. Now, you have to question whether losing this amount of weight, let's say it's genuine, is worth the trade-off of what he would lose in return, because perhaps he loses durability. Perhaps that extra mass makes him harder to tie up on the inside. He wants to be free on the inside to let go of those very fast combinations with that short arc and the short power punching that he can produce. Maybe he needs that sort of size. After all, he came in a little bit trimmer against Chris Arreola in a fight that he was expected to look really good in, and he struggled and he got dropped. So will losing too much weight affect Andy Ruiz? Has he been big for such a long time that his body has essentially acclimatized to being bigger? And so when he loses weight, rather than becoming healthier in the sort of traditional sense, being fitter and so on and so forth, he actually drains himself in some way and loses durability. Let me know what you think about that and whether you think it's a good development or not. Moving on from that, let's talk about Ryan Garcia. It's well documented now that Ryan Garcia has left Eddie Reynoso in somewhat acrimonious circumstances. When he left, he was sort of saying that Eddie Reynoso didn't really have time to train him. Canelo Alvarez piped up and said he's got time for everybody. Ryan just needed to make himself available. He was semi-questioning the dedication of Ryan Garcia. Well, Ryan has always said he wants to keep it respectful. He's very grateful for what they've done for him. But you still get a little bit, there's a hint, right, of a little bit of needle between the two camps. Well, Ryan Garcia has been asked about what he thinks will occur between Gennady Golovkin and Canelo Alvarez. And what he said to me suggests that there's a little bit of spite there still from Ryan Garcia. He came out and predicted that Triple G will have the fight of his life. He says, listen, the obvious pick would be Canelo, but I don't know why. There's just something telling me that Triple G is going to really turn up and do something special, and I have to go with Triple G to get it done. Now, a prediction does not necessarily mean who you want to win. Boxers often get offended if you pick against them. I know it's a different sort of sport than, say, football, whereby if you're, I don't know, an Arsenal fan and you predict that you're going to go away to Manchester City and lose the game, it doesn't mean that you want your team to lose the game, and your fellow fans aren't going to accuse you of that, right? It's just this idea of, okay, you're being a bit pessimistic, but I understand why you're saying what you're saying. Hopefully we can get a result. In boxing, because, you know, losing a fight is almost questioning a guy's machismo. What are you trying to say? I'm weak, I'm not a good enough fighter, I'm not man enough? So they get offended, and that shouldn't be the case. You can pick against someone without wanting them to lose. Nonetheless, the reason I think that there's a little bit more to this than just an honest prediction is because at the start of the interview, he says, one thing I'll say is that whoever loses this fight, I definitely think will have to retire. What kind of thing is that to say? I mean, I know Canelo Alvarez just lost to Dimitri Bivol, but let's not get it twisted. This guy is still the super middleweight undisputed champion. Let's say he was to lose to Gennady Golovkin. They might run it back a fourth time. Even if it doesn't get run back a fourth time, let's say Golovkin says, you know what, I've done everything I've wanted to do now, I retire, and the belts are up for grabs. Are you betting against Canelo Alvarez potentially winning them all again? So this idea that he would have to retire, to me, is ludicrous. He's still in his prime. He's at the top of his game. Losing a fight to a bigger man in Dimitri Bivol, and then losing a fight to a fantastic, in my opinion, one of the great middleweights in Gennady Golovkin, would not be a sign that he has to retire, albeit against an old Gennady Golovkin. Let me know what you think. Is this just an honest prediction from Ryan Garcia, or is that needle coming through? Moving on, let's talk about Tommy Fury and Jake Paul. Tommy Fury has put out an Instagram story to say he cannot go to the United States. He cannot enter the nation. He's been banned and he feels devastated, and he'd love to make the Jake Paul fight happen. Jake Paul instantly jumped up on social media and said, Tommy, no matter how hard you try to get out of this fight, I'm going to do everything in my power to not let you weasel your way out. My team and my partners have made it clear the steps you need to take to solve your latest excuse. Take them or admit you're a scared little you know what. Hashtag Tommy Fumbles. Now here's the thing. I don't know whether what Jake Paul has suggested to Tommy Fury is actually a solution, right? This could just be some PR damage. It doesn't mean that what he's told him to do is going to resolve his problems and allow him to be let into the United States. So we have to take what Tommy Fury is saying at face value at this stage, even though I know a lot of people are out there thinking, listen, he can't go with his dad, he can't go with his brother, he's lacking the confidence, he doesn't want to make that journey. Despite that, let's take what he's saying at face value just for a moment. This is grossly unfair. And I've semi-covered this sort of thing in the past when it comes to athletes of a certain nationality. You cannot be guilty by association. You are not responsible for what people you may know are going to do unless you are aiding and abetting. And nobody has suggested that Tommy Fury is guilty of any crime. This idea that employees of Probellum or people that know the accused must be targeted and punished is completely undemocratic. You get this in tyrannical nations. Let's say, for argument's sake, you've got a tyrant and he wants to subvert democracy and he has an opposition leader, and that opposition leader's main benefactor is some sort of billionaire who is a legitimate businessman. The tyrant can accuse the legitimate businessman of a crime and sanction him, despite the fact that It's not even gone to court. By association, he can then accuse the opposition leader of being a criminal, and they maintain power. And I'm not suggesting that dynamic is at play here, of course. The people involved are not involved in politics or anything like that. I'm just trying to explain what a slippery slope this is and how philosophically you cannot apply this approach in a democracy. We're talking about boxing here. How many boxers do you think are out there who are not aware of people that are alleged criminals? Are you joking here? What are we going to do? Ban everyone in the entire sport? How about you, the listener? Do you not know people that have been alleged to have been criminals, perhaps petty, perhaps serious? Come on now. Should you be punished as a result of that? Leave it out. This is ridiculous, man. We can't go down this route. And the thing is, we're not even seeing consistency here. In football, for argument's sake, you get various chairmen of Premier League football clubs or Championship football clubs. Go and look at them, check them out. Owners of these clubs that have been alleged to be involved in some serious crimes. Nobody's calling on their associates or their employees, such as the footballers, their indirect employees, from being banned from entering nations or being banned from the sport. And I've mentioned this on one of Hatman's videos, and I had a couple of people, I mentioned it as a comment, and I had a couple of people respond to me to say, yeah, but there's a gap between the chairman and the footballers. You know, they don't directly mix with each other in the way, say, Tyson Fury mixes with the accused. That's not actually true. The chairman most of the chairmen have a very active role in football clubs. They go into changing rooms to encourage players. They will often invite them out for dinner, and they'll have team bonding sessions, and they're always there. When the chairman of Leicester City, and I'm not accusing him of a crime at all, of course, this is just an example, when he tragically died in that helicopter crash, do you remember how devastated Kasper Schmeichel was? He considered him not just a friend, but a friend of the family. And he was saying how everybody at the club was greatly devastated because everybody was so close to him. What, you think that's the only case of chairman knowing the footballers? Just because you know somebody and you're friends with somebody, and you use the term friends loosely, like I said, because no one's suggesting here that Tommy Fury has any sort of knowledge of the inner workings of the accused or that he's involved in any way. So when you have a friend who's accused of something, that does not make you guilty. This is ludicrous, and it has to stop, man, because it's a slippery slope and it's moving away from democratic values, and it's a very dangerous step to be taken. So I hope this is resolved and we can see the fight. Now, moving on from that, let's talk about Joe Joyce and Joseph Parker. Joseph Parker, of course, was due to fight Joe, and he's then signed for Boxer. I was very disappointed to hear that Joe Joyce was instantly going to move on. I felt like they should have made the effort. To me, when I first heard about this, it looked like just because he'd moved to Boxer that Frank Warren thought, no way. And I was quite critical of Frank and also the fans that were almost justifying this idea that Joe Joyce should move on now, because it almost makes it acceptable that if you don't cross the street, or if you have representation that is from another promoter, that there's an excuse not to make a fight happen. To me, it shouldn't matter. It doesn't matter who your lawyer is, for instance, who your representation is. Why should it? These are two fighters. They want to fight. Get it on. You can make an arrangement where the fight will be on BT, or perhaps it will be shown on both channels. And you can alter the financial agreements as a result of that. If BT are going to make less money and they want to put less money up for it and so on and so forth, I understand it. But it's not an excuse for the fight not to occur. Nonetheless, I've altered my opinion on this a little bit. Not on the idea that cross-promotional fights should be happening and we need to stop giving these guys a pass for it not happening, but rather on who's at fault here. Because Ben Shalom came out and he said in an interview that he's willing to make any fight happen. He's still willing to make the Joe Joyce fight happen. But they're also looking at Deontay Wilder. And if the Deontay Wilder fight was to come off, it sort of silences a lot of people that are saying, well, Joseph Parker was just looking to dodge Joe Joyce. Because even if you think Joe Joyce at this stage might even be a harder opponent than Deontay Wilder, maybe you feel that Deontay Wilder's taken a lot of damage after the fight against Tyson Fury. He's nonetheless a very, very dangerous opponent and a long reigning heavyweight champion. It can't really be seen as a duck. There will be many people that will consider Deontay Wilder to be vastly superior to Joe Joyce. So it's kind of like when Amir Khan didn't fight Kell Brook but opted to fight Canelo, and a lot of people were saying, well, how can you accuse him of ducking now, right? It could be that sort of thing. But in the same sentence, you heard Ben Shalom come out and say, if we can't make that fight happen, then we're looking at others like Otto Wallin and Franklin. Well, these guys, you'd have to argue, are probably not Joe Joyce. If that was to occur, well, then you could find the argument to say, well, actually, this is somewhat of a duck. Let me know what you think about this, because Joe Joyce has come out on Instagram and said, so, Mr. Parker, I've always wanted to fight you, and you pretended you wanted to fight. But in reality, you say and do everything to avoid me. After it was agreed, you pulled out of the scheduled date of July the 2nd with a BS excuse about your trainer, and then you begged to have the fight pushed to September to have more time to train, and I agreed. Then you asked for more stuff. That was all agreed. After saying it was all good for weeks, and then you signed somewhere else. Real talk, you're full of ish, and you don't want the fight. Tell your new promoter I'm fighting on September the 24th. If you're not scared, sign the contract and stop ducking me. So he's showing a willingness to make that fight happen. He said to him, sign the contract. So the contract's still in his court, in Joseph Parker's court, and you've heard Ben Shalom not rule out the fight against Joe Joyce. So now it looks like the ball's in Joseph Parker's court. So if this fight doesn't happen and the opponent is then not Deontay Wilder, perhaps a lot of people will be accusing Joseph Parker of ducking Joe Joyce. Let me know what you think about that. Moving on, the notorious one, Conor McGregor has put out an Instagram message to say, I accept, and next to it was this photograph here of him landing a right hook to the midriff of Floyd Mayweather. It sparked rumours that there will be a rematch. How do you feel about this? Me personally, I have to be honest, I kind of like it. I want to know about adjustments that Conor can make. Did he learn about pacing himself from the first fight? Perhaps Floyd Mayweather is that bit older now and it becomes more interesting. Maybe those reflexes are waning a little bit more. He has just been fighting YouTubers and stuff. Whatever you say, Conor McGregor is still a highly trained striker, a highly trained fighter, even if he's not a boxer. Could we see the gap from the first fight close? And I also wonder what weight it would be at, because Conor McGregor is looking massive and it's muscle. It's not like he's looking like he's got fat to shed and he can come down healthily and comfortably. Is he going to have to drain himself? In which case, are we going to see a weakened Conor McGregor against Floyd Mayweather and he's going to get the same sort of treatment he got in the first fight? What if he's allowed to come in a little bit heavier? What if the fight is, say, at, I don't know, middleweight, or who knows at what particular weight they could get it up to? And he does have the bigger physique. And he is able to use that against Floyd at this stage of Floyd's career. Has Floyd aged? He has been fighting YouTubers. That's hardly the best preparation against a guy who is a very accomplished fighter and a very accomplished striker. He is not a boxer. We know that. The pacing of boxing is different. Even the angles that you try to use to cut off a ring is different to how you would do it in a cage. And it makes a big difference, believe it or not. A lot of people don't realize how significant that is. Also, where you set shots up on the inside, you can afford to work, and Floyd had a lot of success working up on the inside against Conor. Conor looked like a real novice on the inside. At one point he was throwing a hammer fist at Floyd when he was on the inside. Why? Because in MMA you can't really work inside like that, because you'll have a guy that will clinch you, will grab you, so you don't have that luxury. So your inside game as an MMA fighter is more about getting your hands on someone and trying to break their construct and wrestling them and getting them in a hold or a clinch or what have you. In boxing, it's a different type of clinch because you're still allowed to work with only your hands. So because he's got these long arms and you can see the arc of the hooks here, they're so wide that Floyd might just be able to get on the inside of that consistently and just tear him up. Is that what you think is going to happen again? Or do you think that Conor has had enough time now to learn from those errors, work more on his boxing game, and against an aging Floyd Mayweather who's a naturally smaller man, he's going to manage to overwhelm him if that fight was to happen? Let me know if you're interested in seeing that fight and all the things we've spoken about in this video today. Please don't forget to land a jab on that like button, a right cross on the subscribe button, and an uppercut on the notifications button. Take care. God bless.